Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast number 261. This edition of Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by WB Global Services. So I have a really good friend of mine named Wayne Brozek. Decided to go out on his own and start his own consulting firm. And it's not something that Wayne is not familiar to. He's done a little bit of that stuff in the past. But Wayne's really one of the, I would say, a guy that understands parts of service like no one else I've been around. So Wayne, thanks for being on the podcast, man.
You bet. Glad to be here, Casey.
So talk about what you're doing now, man.
Well, so, after I left the John Deere aftermarket, decided that I've been doing consulting in the past, obviously, as you know, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to open up a consulting firm and we're going to call it WB Global Services because we've trained in South America, Central America, had a lot of fun in Argentina and all those things, but decided that there's a real need to improve our aftermarket operations. Right. And now is the time to do it.
Yep.
Everybody's selling, as you know, can sell anything and everything they have on the lot. But the real progressive dealers and the dealers that are paying attention know that pendulum is going to swing back someday.
Yep.
And when it swings back, we better be ready in parts and service to carry the load of the dealership expenses. And so really a big focus on aftermarket performance, right? So what we do is we have WB Global Services and we go out and we'll do training to service managers, parts managers, and we also have a program we call the Edge that is dealership training. It's a year-long program that you sign up for, and we give you 100% fee guarantee. So if that training costs $25,000, for example, if we do not generate an additional $25,000 worth of gross revenue for you that next year, you pay us nothing.
Okay.
Right. And we'll come out, we'll do an initial interview of all your people that deal with parts and service and come back, formulate a plan, get the dealer principal and the executive team's buy-in to say, yeah, I think those are our weak areas. We could definitely use some improvement in those areas. Then we'll go to work on that. And then throughout the course of the next 12 months, we'll be on site 2 more times. Okay. And then we'll do monthly calls or quarterly calls to keep a finger on the pulse and make sure the metrics are moving the direction we need them to move. And if we have to come out and handle a special meeting or something like that, be more than happy to do that stuff too. So
right on.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your background. So
okay.
Start back at the beginning, kind of how you got into this business and how you ended up here.
Well, so in high school, I started delivering parts at the local Ford dealership. Right. My uncle got me the job and I really enjoyed that. And I wanted to work the counter. I wanted to help the guys on the parts counter. So the 2 guys that I worked with were helping train me on basic part numbers. And when I moved away and go to college, I needed a job. So the job I knew was training in parts. So I went to the parts dealership in Colorado and talked to the guys and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you come on board. So started there working the back parts counter and built some really good friendships with technicians and really started to see the frustration on the technicians' faces and their language and all that when they asked for a part and I couldn't provide it, right? Because those guys were paid to put those parts on and get the next vehicle in and out. So after I graduated, I decided I was going to move away. That never happened. I stayed right where I was at. 20 years later, I'm still working the same Ford dealership, but loved it. Great deal. But my passion became parts inventory management. Right. When we typed it in and we showed one, I didn't feel like we should have to run upstairs or downstairs or across the dealership to find that one part. If it showed it, we should have it. And back in the day, when I was working the parts counter, we could type in, we could show 3 of a fuel pump or whatever, and I'd have to physically go put my hands on one of them. Our inventory was so jacked up. And so the plight became, I really wanted to understand the science of parts inventory management. So when the assistant manager left, they promoted me to assistant parts manager. And I told the parts manager at the time, I said, hey, you know what? I really want to understand this. We got to improve our accuracy. So I started studying the inventories and how other dealerships were doing things and realized that, we did inventory once a year. We didn't do a perpetual inventory. So I told my parts manager, I said, hey, I want to start doing bin counts every single day. And I think we should make every other parts guy do it as well. And there was 5 of us in the department at the time. And we started doing perpetual inventory counts, bin checks, and we'd check the parts and we'd clean the parts and seal the parts back up. It wasn't just count the part and make sure you had it, but we started gaining a lot of accuracy and we started realizing that, hey, we have more shrinkage in our parts department than we really recognized. And then the parts manager moved away and I became the parts manager. So now I was in total control of that, right? So I said, we're going to do this every single day. There's daily processes and daily tasks we're going to do. And we were turning our inventory about 3 to 4 times a year in the automotive sector. And after we started really refining our processes, we shrunk the depth of our inventory, increased the breadth of it a little bit, and we started noticing our turn was improving. We went from 3 to 4 to about 6 to 7 and 7 to 8 times a year, which was really good. And off the shelf fill status, because that's what everybody will say next. Oh yeah, your turn was really good because you're relying on the manufacturer to stock all your parts, right? Yeah. So what's your fill rate? Well, our fill rate for stock status parts, we had 2 classifications: stock status, which is what you'd sell 3 times or more a year, and non-stock was special orders and things you might sell 1 or 2 times a year. But our non-stock or our stock status parts, our fill rate was 95, 98% all the time.
Right.
So we did really well at that. And about 7, 8 years after that, we moved to a brand new dealership, built a brand new store, and the service manager retired. And so the owner came to me and said, Wayne, would you like to be the service manager? I said, heck yeah. I was always getting chewed out by the service department, right? As a parts manager. So I said, heck yeah, I'll jump the fence and I'll just start doing the butt chewing, right? And so I move over and realize, well, the grass isn't that much greener over there because those guys really ran through the meat grinder on the service side. But did that for about, I don't know, 7, 8 years. And then Ford kind of switched their mentality and they said, hey, look, we would rather have a fixed operations director versus a parts and a service manager. One person in charge of both. Yeah. So I took that role and we had a great deal, great team working for us. And I always said, I want to go on the sales side because those guys, in parts and service, you get chewed out a lot. People aren't real happy when they come in to see you. Right. But the sales guys, they always get cookies and cakes brought to them and people are smiling and joking. So I said, I want to move over there. Right. And so an opening came up and the owner moved me over into used sales. And I started understanding the sales side of the business and then went from used to new and then a general manager. We had a second location. I became a general manager of that store and still ran the fixed operations at the main store. So that was a lot of fun. And the dealership that I went to, well, when I was in Nebraska and was going to high school, where I very first started, that dealership came up for sale. So I asked the owner, I said, hey, we're growing. We now have 2 stores or 3 stores. And would you like to buy this one? He's like, no, I'm not interested at all. And I said, oh, I'd really like to buy it. But I only had a slight problem, Casey. Yeah. Well, I had about 1.7 million of these little problems, right? yeah, cash, right? I just didn't have that laying around. Yeah. And so, but the owner said, hey, you know what? I'll partner up with you and we'll buy it. So we went to Ford, said, yep, no problem. Ford, Lincoln, Mercury said, yes, go to Toyota, visit those guys. And they said, no, even though his family had been like, he was a 4th generation, right? We had all the experience that we just couldn't get it done. And so another group came up and said, hey, we'd like to buy that store, but we'd like to have a on-site general manager partner. And I said, okay, well, I checked it all out. I thought, great. So we went into that. And I tell everybody, partnerships are a lot like a marriage. Some are really, really good and some are really, really bad. Right. Mine was the latter. Yeah. Mine was not good at all. Yeah. And so I got out of that and, but I learned a lot. And then my neighbor had John Deere stores and they asked, hey, would you like to come aboard as a general service manager? And I thought about it and wasn't really interested at first because I didn't know that much about ag, right? I mean, when I grew up, every summer I got shipped off to my uncle's farm. And at the time I hated it, right? Because all my buddies were at the, baseball leagues and swimming pool and skating rink. And here I am in junior high school and I'm 150 miles from a loaf of bread. Right. But it taught me some really good work ethic and it taught me general mechanics and things like that, how to weld, all those basic things that my buddies didn't get. But I decided, you know what? I don't know anything about ag, but I do know parts and service. And I know technicians are technicians and parts are parts. And it doesn't matter what you're stocking, it needs to turn and you need to have a good feel. So went to work there. And at the time, I think there was 4 stores in the group. And we went from 4 over the course of almost 16 years to 16 locations. And I got the chance to meet you and talk to you and become good friends of yours. But then after that, I decided, during that same time, of course, I met several managers in Deere and things like that, and joined a performance group and DPG, and met 2 guys, George Waykazer and Steve Ubel, and still really good friends with both those guys. And Steve Ubel asked me to come with him because I gave a lot of input into our dealer performance group, and on a metric that we started to, George and Yubi had a rough idea what they wanted for labor performance, but together we all tweaked it and became what we all know today in the dealer world is labor performance. And so they asked me to join them and teach labor performance to other John Deere stores while I still worked. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And I had a ton of fun doing that and sharing my experiences with other dealers and just watching people get it, the aha moment when they truly understand how do I alter my gross margin percentage? What really affects that? You know, and how can we change it? And so that's been a lot of fun for me, Casey. And I really get a lot of enjoyment out of that. Right. So opening WB Global, I mean, actually it started years ago with a couple other large dealer group managers. We'd get together and we'd meet twice a year, and we had our own little teeny performance group, and we'd hold each other accountable for little things. And that was the start of WB Global, the dealer to dealer peer group. And then it grew into our meetings, and then it was just kind of a natural fit that when I was done on the retail side to do this on my own, right? So it's been a ton of fun. It really has.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a life's journey. It's always fun, man. It's like, I'm like you, I should not, and there's no reason why I should be in this business. You know, I mean, I didn't even know how to even, all I knew is combines had the big wheels on the front. Right. You know what I mean? That's about it, you know? So yeah, that whole journey is something there. So
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what you're doing, kind of how that process gets started. You know, I'm a dealer principal. I want to talk to you about, I need some improvement in my purchase service department. How are you going to help me?
So the easiest way would be go to wbglobalservices.com. And on our website, there's a link. You can contact us. You can send me an email. A lot of dealerships, I meet people, you know, through doing, whether it's a training event for some other dealership group or doing a talk, you know, or doing maybe send out an article, and some dealers will call us and talk to us. And it's real simple. We'll come out and do an evaluation. First, I'll talk to you on the phone. We'll figure out what your needs are, what you're struggling with. And then we'll come out and do an on-site visit, do an initial assessment, and then build our action plan from there. You know, we've done 2 store locations. We've done 28 store locations. So it doesn't really matter the size. We have a program for each. And speaking of the program, we call it the Dealer Edge. It's an Edge program. And it's based on the fee structure is based on how many locations you have, but the fee is 100% guaranteed. So say the fee is $20,000 for your stores. Mm-hmm. If we do not generate an additional $20,000 worth of gross margin for you and your company over the course of our training, the 12 months, then you pay us nothing. Right. But we haven't paid that out yet, and I don't plan on it. Right. I think that, I know that our training brings a lot of value, and we've got a lot of dealers that'll tell you, it's been really helpful having that here and help us.
Right. So talk about a little bit of some of the future plans you have.
Well, okay. So the future plans are I'd really like to keep growing the consulting side, but what I really would like to see is our performance groups. Right. You know, the dealer to dealer performance groups where you can hold each other accountable. And there's a lot of those out there, and there's different programs, but these would be just targeted just for aftermarket, not the entire dealership. Right. You know, a lot of times when you go to a dealer group meeting like that, you know, they'll have 2 or 3 for sales and 1 for aftermarket. Right. There's not a lot of activity and gain from one meeting. Right. You don't build the trust, you don't build the camaraderie, but in our performance groups, you build that trust, and you're more willing to be more open and candid with each other, right? And really hold each other accountable. Right. Because that's what I find a lot of times, you know, you look on my shelves, there's training materials back here that over the years you go to a really good class and you think, man, you're all jazzed up, your employees are all jazzed up, they want to get after it. Then you get back and the battle starts happening, right? And that material gets pushed on a shelf. And there's tons of good advice in those books or those manuals, and ways to make more gross margin and net profit, all those kinds of things, help your turn, help your fill, all those things. But we get so busy working in the business that we don't have the time to work on it. So our performance groups really make it so that if you say you're going to commit to something, we're here to hold you accountable
Right.
for that, right?
Yeah.
You're just not going to put it on the bookshelf and forget about it.
Right.
So,
Yep.
yeah. So we'd really like to see it grow into that, and heck, maybe eventually do even the sales side of it.
Right.
You know.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's the parts and service side of the business. I think as the evolution, especially on the farm equipment business, of how machines are being sold and what those look like, the technology that you can add on to older equipment now,
Right,
to make them newer, that the aftermarket side of the business is going to really excel even more than it is now. I mean,
Exactly.
I could almost, I mean, right now everyone shoots for that 100% absorption rate. That's what they're trying to get to. That I think that in the future, that parts and service side of the business is going to be at 100%. Because if it's not, I just have a hard time believing that there's going to be enough. You know, I don't know that the selling of equipment is going to be the same way we see it now, where there's this perpetual turn, and we see a lot of people doing stuff. I think we're going to look more at a construction model where there's you might be buying stuff based off of like a job,
right?
But you're also looking at throughput.
Yes.
Is it cheaper for me just to rebuild that than buy a new one? I mean, where does that line start to come in? And I think that's where parts and service is going to have a big play in the future.
And that's what we push our dealerships for, is, you know what, we want 100% absorption,
right?
Because we want to bulletproof your dealership, right? Yeah. We want, no offense to sales, but you guys get the opportunity to sell the first one, maybe two.
Yep.
But if we don't have a good aftermarket team supporting you, you could be the greatest sales guy in the world. And I know you are, Casey. I know you are. But if I don't support it in parts and service, they're gonna leave.
That's what I always tell people. Like, I'll sell the first one.
Yes.
The parts and service department sell the next 10.
Amen.
You know, and
I totally agree.
And that is the honest to God truth. If you don't have the support structure, you know, if you ask any customer, for the most part, and you ask them, does your parts department have parts? That most of the time it's no.
Never have the parts.
Because they think about the last time they went in there.
That's the only time they think about it.
Yeah. But the previous 8.5 times or 9 times they were in there, you know, they had the part.
Right.
You know, it's just that one time when they needed that one part, didn't have it.
It's like anything in life. You remember the bad experience, not necessarily all the great ones.
Right. Yeah. But if it's a perpetual problem,
right,
you know, it's going to be a thing. And also from a big picture perspective, when you start looking at the developing countries that are coming in, you know, Eastern Europe, I know there's a war going on over there right now, but you start looking at Eastern Europe and Africa and Asia and places like that, where you're starting to see more of this modernization of farming come into play. And you've been to foreign countries and been through departments, and I've been to foreign countries, I've been through, and there's you know, we're sitting in your office here, and this office is probably 10 foot by 15 feet, 20 feet, something like that. And that was one guy's entire parts room.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it was like, they had like space on the shelf still to put stuff on it.
Yes.
And so that, as those, like you said, you know, as the machines population grows and different aspects of that, of how to keep those machines running start to grow.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge, you know,
really
and it's going to see growing that parts and service business across the spectrum to keep the world fed is going to be a bigger challenge, you know.
Yeah. But the exciting part is the telematics involved.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Like the equipment is getting so smart.
Yep.
And what's really fun and challenging for me is, you know, parts inventory management. I love that science. I really do. Mm-hmm. But to get our parts departments to be more predictive is the cool part, right?
Yep.
Because now we have so many ways to capture the data, you know, and as dealer groups expand and grow, you know, maybe they have one that's farther down south, so maybe that harvest time starts sooner. Mm-hmm. Well, you can notify your northern stores, hey, get prepared for this wave because it's headed your way.
Right.
These are the parts that we see breaking, right? The more we're able to track that and say, hey, at X amount of hours, between 500 and 800 hours, here's a couple common parts that fail. Well, now we're becoming more predictive, right? Mm-hmm. We've been really good for the last 80, 100 years of being reactive. You know, stock order, that's a reactive thing. But putting parts on your on-site cabinet at your farm saying, hey, your machine population and aging is getting into this group. We got to put these parts on that inside cabinet or on-site cabinet, right? Yep. So we know that about 800 hours, that water pump is going to fail, right? So here's the belt, here's the pump, here's the fluids. And so that's the exciting part. I think the telematics is really helping the parts departments become more predictive.
Yep. And the other side of it too is as this machinery gets more smart, and things and they start looking at the componentry that goes into them. Rarely when I go in the shop and sit and listen to what the techs are doing back there, the last thing that they're doing is actually fixing a physical component on it.
Right.
They're chasing electrical, hydraulic issues, some sensor someplace that's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So they're spending a lot more time with the test light and doing diagnostics than they ever have been in history. And so back to your point of being proactively being able to engage those scenarios as things come through, make a big difference in the way you look at customer service.
Right. Well, 100 years ago when I got started right in the business, you'd tear everything apart and you'd have grease all the way up to here, right? Yeah. And it used to be pretty commonplace to go into a shop and see at least one transmission apart or maybe an overhaul going on over here. You don't see that in our shops hardly at all anymore, right? Yeah. It's exactly what you're saying. We've got our fluke meter out and we're chasing a cracked wire or broken wire, and that takes a ton of skill, right? I mean, you pull open some of these connectors and there's 84 pins in there.
Sure. You had 84 wires.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the craziest part of that, because you sit there and watch those guys do it, and it's these, just like you said, I mean, these technicians and parts people as we come into this brave new world that we're headed into, you've got to be able to sit back there. And like you said, with the size and scope of these dealerships that we see now, the data points that you get to collect are just massive.
It is.
And it's crossed a broad spectrum of, what happens in, Bridgeport, for example, or Scotts Bluff. That's a totally different farming area than Cheyenne Wells. Right. So it's totally different. Irrigated row crop, dry land, wheat, and cattle production, all this stuff. So the data that you're getting from down here, just like you said, even though it's not the same crop, but what's breaking here will probably break here in the fall. That's right. You know what I mean? We start looking at and just similar things and start chasing those things and building that data point to bring it all back in. It makes a big difference.
It makes a huge difference, right? Yeah. And as dealerships keep getting larger and larger, I think that one thing we fail to utilize is our economies of scale. Sure. Right. I mean, we should look at it and it gets a little touchy and sensitive, but it's truly one inventory. Yeah. Right. Especially in the parts inventory and even technicians to a certain degree. I mean, you can share technicians. You can have technicians that get really proficient at a recall or a PIP notice or something like that. That if you send one guy or gal out to do 5 or 6 or 7 of those PIPs or those recalls, they get really proficient at it. Yeah. Where you don't need 3 locations, each one of them doing 1 or 2 and not hitting the time. Right. So there's all kinds of little things like that sometimes we just got to think outside the box and how can we put these pieces together and make it fit a whole lot better.
Absolutely. Wayne, tell people how they can get a hold of you. What's the easiest way to do it?
The easiest way is to go to WB Global Services online, wbglobalservices.com, or you can always reach out to Wayne at WB Global Services. There's an email right there. And or heck, they could reach me through your podcast as well.
Sure. You have social media? You on social media at all?
LinkedIn.
Okay. What do you on? Just Wayne Brozek on LinkedIn? Or
yes.
Okay. Right on. All right. So check that out. Well, Wayne, it's good to see you again, man. And I always enjoy seeing you, dude. It's always a good time to sit down and talk with you and go from there. So with that, I am Casey Seymour with Wayne Brozek. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC, LinkedIn, Moving Iron Podcast. You can go to the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel, check that out. And you can also go to Moving Iron LLC website for everything Moving Iron related there. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour with Wayne Brozek. Let's go smart, folks. Out.